live from Studio 5 on AMI Audio. Mike Ross and Joeita Gupta with you. As we mentioned before the break, a lot of companies might offer ramps, some wider aisles, talking ATMs, accessible washrooms, or automatic doors. But what about that widening gap between the physical and digital world for people with disabilities? Joining us right now to discuss this a little bit more and to improve online accessibility is Simon Dermer. He's the managing director and co-founder of Essential Accessibility. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me in, Mike. Joeita.
And Chris O'Brien is here as well. He's the accessibility officer here at AMI. Nice to see you.
Good morning, everybody.
So, Simon, tell us first and foremost just what you guys do with your company.
Well, generally what we do is we help brands enhance the customer experience for people with disabilities. And we do this through in two key manners. First of all, we help them ensure that their digital environments, like their websites, their mobile apps, are coded in a manner that are what we call web accessible, which means they are designed with the needs of people with vision impairments in mind, for example, with color contrast, so that they work seamlessly with different technologies like screen readers, for instance, for people who are vision impaired. And so they basically play nice with technologies in the marketplace. The second key pillar of what we do to help brands engage with people with disabilities is the fact that we have an assistive technology piece. The traditional view of assistive technology and is based on what was known as the medical model in the 70s, in the 80s, and even, unfortunately, to this day. The medical model takes the view that it's the responsibility of the individual to go out and acquire whatever technology they require for their own disability. It's the responsibility of the organization to create an environment that can accommodate and welcome it. What we did that is different, is informed more by what is known as the social model, where you're making all of your experiences inclusive. And what we did is we took that type of assistive technology that is traditionally sold one product or license or at a time to the individual, and instead of selling it to these users, quite often who have very wide and varied needs and everything from accommodating their homes through their transportation and this laundry list of necessities, we adapted it in a way that the organization could make it available for free to their stakeholders, to their users. So to give an example that some people can relate to potentially, you may have seen pictures of Stephen Hawking utilizing his elaborate sort of technologies to carry out and complete his very important work. Well, that technology was provided to him through Intel Corporation, which sends teams of researchers over to help them make the world's smartest man ultra productive. Well, not everybody has access to those kinds of resources. And even if you live in a very fortunate province like Ontario, where we have a program that funds quite a bit of technology, even in that situation, you have to decide, what is my one technology I'm going to be allowed every, I think it's 2 years. You have to pay large deductibles. It's still not feasible, and we live in one of the best places in the world, if not the greatest. So we teamed up with the March of Dimes, recognizing that the vast majority of people don't have access to what they need, or they have great difficulty acquiring it. And the goal was basically to create a social impact model to leverage the power of brands to make this possible. And that's it. So a number of leading corporations like Canadian Tire, Tim Hortons, Shoppers Drug Mart, Cineplex are all part of this coalition that are basically empowering people with disabilities through the provision of this type of technology as part of what we call doing disability well.
Right. And to that end, you are doing a really good job, it sounds like, tackling the problem of digital accessibility and web accessibility on many fronts and working with various stakeholders. But I wanted to ask you, Simon, to take a step back and tell us how it all got started and where did this idea come from?
My co-founder, one of the co-founders of this company, Spiro Papathanassakis, we were both working for a large healthcare company with a chain of health and rehabilitation centers, where we were focused basically, one component of the service offering was reintegrating people who had acquired an injury or disability back into the workplace, back into what's called their activities of daily living. So through that clinical model, which a lot of it is healthcare related, when you're bringing people and integrating them back into the workplace, quite often they'll need assistive technology. And what we recognized was it was still, even when you had funding sources like insurance companies, disability insurers, an employer, even in those situations, it could become quite challenging to acquire the types of technologies that were necessary to inform that person's path back to restoring function. So we saw that there was this gap in the marketplace that needed addressing. Meantime, we had been approached by a leading developer out of Switzerland that had created this extremely advanced, even for today, platform that took all the ad hoc kind of solutions for physical limitations, all the things that an individual could potentially benefit from if you couldn't type, if you couldn't move a mouse. And what was unique about this platform is they took all these a la carte solutions and they aggregated it into this one-size-fits-all platform. Number one, so it was the closest thing to a perfect solution for any physical limitation. It had this really intuitive, easy-to-use AOL-type interface for people who weren't necessarily computer savvy, and it was also software-based. So you didn't need to have like $10,000 hardware to accomplish what it is you wanted to do. So altogether, that lent itself to scaling and widespread deployment. And we took that in its first iteration. We took that very expensive technology, redeployed it in this software as a service type model for the brands, and it all took off from there.
It's live from Studio 5 on AMI Audio. Mike Ross and Joeita Gupta, along with Simon Dermer, Managing Director and Co-founder of Essential Accessibility. Chris O'Brien's here as well. He's the Accessibility Officer here at AMI. Chris, I think a lot of people out there would think, well, it's AMI. I mean, these guys are ahead of the curve on everything accessibility. What are you thinking when you're hearing Simon talk here?
I think the more people that are engaged in this activity, the better. My question for Simon would be, how does an organization like yourself keep up with the rapid demands and fast-changing pace of the internet? I know you guys do digital audits as well. Are you guys familiar with you guys obviously leverage WCAG, which is the World Wide Web Consortium's standards and guidelines. Those were written quite a while ago. In your opinion, as someone that does this on a regular basis, how would you like to see those standards and guidelines progress to meet the ever-evolving nature of technology as we know it?
Well, I'll tell you what, fundamentally, the nice, simple, succinct way of answering that is design your products to be usable by people with disabilities. Mm-hmm. And if you do that, you're going to comply with everything. Mm-hmm. Don't focus so much on guidelines necessarily, as much as focus on actual users with different disabilities who use different technologies. The guidelines are there to help you, to give you some context to where you need to be to effectively codify in a manner of speaking what your practices and inform your development efforts. But really, that's why functional testing is so important, to take actual users with disabilities and to have them interact and liaise with products, most commonly websites. And that's why there's no one path to achieving an accessible environment. I mean, you can do it in-house. You can enlist the support of vendors. You can go on training missions. Like there are a lot of ways to do things right. But one thing is very critical, no matter how you approach it, you must have people with actual disabilities functionally test, it's called, the product to make sure the pronouncements you make are in fact validated and it truly is an accessible design.
So as somebody who has a disability, this is one of the challenges that I have. I think when you're dealing with a larger company, let's say you talked about Canadian Tire or you're talking about one of the top 5 banks, their profit margins are much larger. They have IT departments. They have a lot of money and a lot of infrastructure to ensure that they're actually designing with people with diverse experiences and different user experiences in mind. But let's say you get into a smaller company, like a nonprofit with a small budget and maybe a small staff. If they wanted to then build accessibility into their design, one of the the concerns they might have is that we just don't have the budget for it. So how would you sort of go about addressing this with maybe a smaller company that wanted to do the right thing but just didn't just felt that it didn't have the resources for it?
Well, what we're seeing, the emerging trend we're seeing in the small business sector is you're seeing a movement and a migration towards vendor-based platforms. For instance, like a Shopify, where they are making efforts to streamline it and to make their environments manageable by the non-technician and give them tools to help them with it. So there's a movement afoot. There is a trend underway. It's not sufficient, but clearly things are moving in the right direction. Again, there are vendors that can help, that can provide resources and advice. You need to educate, you need to do a bit of training. Organizations like the Canadian Marketing Association offer webinars for web developers. Anyone who's practicing and who's in the web space definitely needs to become acquainted with the issues around this, the importance and the necessity. And it all starts at that awareness level. And of course, getting on programs like this and mapping it back to the reality of the personas that are interacting with these brands. Once you recognize the importance and the necessity, you've taken a big step there on the path itself to the journey to achieving the goal.
I would imagine that in its early days, you would have been approached by companies in a reactive way. Somebody makes a complaint about a lack of accessibility, and they've got to react. Are you finding that more companies are being proactive now and not necessarily waiting for that to happen?
It's there are two things. One, disability is a very, very complaint-driven area, and it's fraught. And what we've tried to change in that context is because it's complaint-driven, it's very thankless. So quite often we'll meet web developers who made extraordinary efforts to create this successful environment, and no one ever really said, "Hey, thank you so much for doing that." All they hear about is that complaint that page 999 on the website. Guess what? I couldn't do this. But that goes for everything in this world. I mean, people don't really complain when things are working properly. You only hear it when. So we're bringing that element of feedback from people that they are expressing their gratitude and appreciation that through surveys and interactive forums. Second of all, in terms of people coming, organizations, and recognizing it, certainly regulations have played a role in informing a sense of urgency to it. Raising that awareness level. Regulations, though, can be a double-edged sword as well, in the sense that if you have regulations and you don't have enforcement, then it becomes a game of just gaming the regulations and doing the minimum just to stay within the lines. So, but that aside, generally regulations are having a positive impact, and it's getting the conversation started.
I want to follow up with you, Simon, about some of the testing that you've done. So around web accessibility, how does the testing process go exactly?
Effectively, there are two components. There's an automated piece which brings us standardization and a nice reporting mechanism that quite often folks in digital like to see, that you can measure the progression. But about 70% of the process is human-driven. Users of different technologies, screen readers, magnifications, who are interacting and basically reporting their feedback, their experience, and then we're recommending at the code level snippets on what needs to be done to remediate and fix. And so when we look at a digital environment, we take a broad survey. We identify the most obvious recurring errors that are obviously being repeated quite often. And the point is to educate the developers so they know, look, this is the mistake you're making over and over and over. Here's what you're doing wrong. Here's what you need to do. And after a few attempts, we do this thing called progression evaluations, where we go back after they've made that first wave of remediation. We evaluate the level of progression, and it's all about getting towards that level of, you strive to the closest thing to perfection. And it's important for everyone to realize you're never going to be perfect. That's okay. It's okay to admit that, but you want to be continually improving, and don't let that stop you from undertaking efforts that you think that it's all or nothing, perfect or nothing. Absolutely not. Do whatever you can. Do what's feasible to increasingly just make that environment more welcoming.
So, Simon, you talked about including users in testing, which is extremely important. for a smaller business like Joeita mentioned, they may not know people with disabilities. How do you connect the small business with the testing group? Do you have any recommendations for people that might be looking to do that but just don't know how to engage?
Sure. It's as I mentioned earlier. No matter how you approach this, at the end of the day, you need to have testers evaluate this. So there are third-party vendors on the marketplace. I'll shamelessly plug ourselves while I'm at it. That we offer this kind of service, and there are resources that are help. You can get in contact with organizations like CNIB and the March of Dimes, and there are OCAD provides it. The Ontario College, it's OCAD University, this is a profession. The accessibility professionals is being it's basically become a profession. It's a discipline. There's a body of knowledge. So ask around, and if you know someone with a disability, ask them. If you know someone who works for a large company, and there are resources out there. Go online. There are courses in the MOOCs, the open source community. There are great courses. A lot of resources. Just take a bit of time, and you'll find it. Do a Google search, and you'll get going.
Perfect.
Simon, how can people learn more about essential accessibility?
Well, I would encourage them go to any of the great brands that are part of our network. Companies like Via Rail and Samsung, and you can go on there and you can see right there. There's a recognizable icon on right on the homepage. If the user or a caregiver, a friend, or a family member clicks it, quite often what it'll open up is a resource where the assistive technology is available there. Try it out. You can do things like navigate a site hands-free and many other things, and learn about how this technology, how brands are leveraging it to drive the conversation, engage deeper with their customers. And of course, very important is the recruiting piece as well. These brands are trying to create welcoming environments to attract candidates with disabilities to apply for positions, and go from there.
Yeah. All right. Appreciate you being here. Thank you very much for dropping by the
having me.
studio. Simon Dermer, Managing Director and Co-founder of Essential Accessibility, talking to us about making the digital world more accessible.